This is North Korea's modern-ish main battle tank, the Chunma-2. The Chunma-2 was described as being a mishmash between the T-14 Armata and the M1 Abrams main battle tank. The reason North Korea built this tank is to replace the older Soviet tanks that it has in its arsenal, along with showing the rest of the world its own self-sufficiency in weapons manufacturing. Although this tank does follow the design doctrines of Western tanks like the Abrams, the Leopard, or the K2 Black Panther of South Korea, this tank also follows the design doctrine of Russian tanks like the T-14 Armata. It is equipped with a 125mm cannon, along with 2 anti-tank guided missiles. The tank also comes with an active protection system, which on the one hand protects it from ATGMs, but on the other hand shows the vulnerability in the tank's design. The APS system is located within the gap in the turret that lacks the armor necessary to protect the crew from oncoming Sabo rounds. Overall, this tank does pose a challenge for the American and South Korean militaries, but the North Koreans lack the battle experience and the resources to operate and maintain these tanks. This is the futuristic military equipment of the country of Ghana. Although a quick disclaimer, the military equipment seen in this video does not belong to the actual Ghanaian military. So the United States took out a missile from one of its destroyers and put it on an F-18 Super Hornet, and that missile in question is the AIM-174B. The reason for this decision comes from the advancements of long-range air-to-air missiles coming from America's adversaries. For example, China's recently built PL-15 and PL-17 missiles have a longer range than the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile that the United States uses. Currently, the United States is in development of new long-range missiles to bridge the gap between them and China, like the AIM-260 missile that's currently being developed. But in order to bridge the gap sooner, the United States decided to take a creative approach with their methods. In this instance, taking an SM-6 and modifying it into the AIM-174B. With the addition of the AIM-174B missile, the United States is able to engage targets in excess of 200 miles, putting it well ahead of the PL-15 missile, but putting it on par with the PL-17 missile of the Chinese military. This is the Panzer VIII Maus tank, the largest and yet one of the worst tanks ever built. By the latter half of World War II, the Germans wanted to make heavily armed tanks that could challenge the numerical advantage that the Allies had when producing tanks. And so they came up with the Panzer VIII Maus tank and built 2 prototypes of the tank. They decided to test the tank only to realize that there were many flaws with the tank. For starters, the Maus tank is incredibly large and incredibly heavy, meaning that if it crossed a bridge, that bridge would likely collapse on the Maus's own weight. Secondly, the Maus was incredibly slow, and due to its large size, it was vulnerable to Allied aircraft attacks. Overall, the tank was a complete failure, and the Germans decided to destroy the Maus tank, but not before the Soviets captured it. And by the end, one Maus was destroyed and the other one was sent to a Soviet museum where it still stands to this day. Here's a brief history of the 1991 Persian Gulf War. After the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq was left with billions of dollars of debt owed to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Iraq tried to get the debt forgiven, citing its defense of the Arabian Peninsula from the country of Iran, but Saudi Arabia and Kuwait refused to forgive the debt. The relationship between Iraq and Kuwait worsened due to ongoing trade disputes, along with territorial disputes as Iraq claimed Kuwait as part of their own country. So the country of Iraq decided to invade Kuwait in order to annex it into the country and to take their oil reserves. The president of Iraq at the time, Saddam Hussein, declared Kuwait to be a province of the country of Iraq, which aggravated much of the world. In response, US President George H.W. Bush decided to set up a coalition in order to expel Iraq from Kuwait. The coalition sent thousands of troops and equipment over to Saudi Arabia in order to lay the groundwork for an invasion of Iraq. They then sent an ultimatum to the Iraqi government, telling them to leave Kuwait or be forced out of Kuwait by military force. Saddam Hussein refused the ultimatum, and in response, the coalition declared war on Iraq, starting an air campaign using thousands of jets in order to destroy Iraqi infrastructure. The coalition sent in ground forces to expel Iraqi troops from Kuwait, and they saw great success in it. The coalition was able to take the capital of Kuwait City and push the Iraqi forces out of the country. Iraqi forces were able to retreat from Kuwait back to Iraq. Some of them were using Highway 80, which the coalition ended up bombarding in a controversial move known as the Highway of Death. The countries of Iraq and the coalition ended up signing a ceasefire, thus ending the conflict between all involved nations. The war ended in a coalition victory as the coalition lost only a few ground forces while Iraq lost many, and Iraq was left in a weakened position after the war ended, and Kuwait was liberated after the conflict ended. So what is the difference between the Army and the Marines? The Army is the military branch that is responsible for large-scale combat operations on land. Meanwhile, the Marines are an expeditionary force that are responsible for combat operations on islands and coastlines. These differences can be seen in the equipment that both sides operate. With the Army, you have tanks and armored fighting vehicles that are used to support the infantry in combat operations, and you also have helicopters that are used to transport troops to wherever they need to be. With the Marines, they have the support of the Navy, along with being able to operate out of amphibious assault ships. They also have access to amphibious assault vehicles to use in combat operations on contested islands. And in terms of the US Marines, they have access to the F-35B stealth fighter, which they could use to provide their support to fellow Marines on the ground. Overall, both sides may look similar to each other, but both of them serve a unique purpose within the military, and both of them couldn't be more different from each other. The French warning shot doctrine. What is it exactly? Unlike the nuclear doctrines of the United States and Russia, France has its own unique doctrine that will use in the event of a nuclear war with an adversary. The French will use a medium-range nuclear cruise missile, otherwise known as the Air Sol Moyen Pate, in order to do a warning shot against an enemy adversary. And just like warning shot, it will deter an enemy adversary from using nuclear weapons against France, because now they know that the French will use nuclear weapons against them. In recent history, the French has lost many people in devastating wars against them in the 20th century. The warning shot that was indirectly aimed at the Warsaw Pact is now also indirectly aimed at Russia. It stands as a message to the Russians that the French are willing to take down as many Russian soldiers as possible in a nuclear hellfire, in order to deter Russia from invading Europe. These are three different types of missiles used by the military in the event of a war. A ballistic missile is a missile that is launched to a predetermined target. The missile is launched into the air in an arched trajectory. It then falls onto the target, delivering its payload, usually an explosive warhead. A cruise missile is a missile that is launched at low altitudes to avoid radar detection. They are guided by onboard computers and can sometimes get help from fighter jets to help hit their target. One example being the F-18 Hornet guiding Tomahawk missiles to enemy locations. A hypersonic missile is a missile that goes above Mach 5. When people talk about hypersonic missiles, they refer to the hypersonic glide vehicles. Hypersonic missiles are launched into the air, release a glide vehicle that glides down to a predetermined target. They glide down at hypersonic speeds and are hard to detect, and also hard to intercept as they are flying way too fast. This is Zone Rouge in France, and is considered one of the most dangerous places in the world. The reason for why it's dangerous is because of unexploded bombs that were found left over from the First World War. The French and German militaries were in a standstill during the war, and so decided to use a lot of artillery to attack each other's positions. They fired thousands of rounds of artillery, including those with chemical weapons, many of which haven't detonated and are stuck in the soil of France to this day. And due to the unexploded bombs and chemical pollution within the area, the French government decided to cut off the area to the public, due to the area being completely uninhabitable. Although there have been some efforts to clean up the area, the red zone will probably remain an area that will be uninhabitable for years to come. This video shows the Japanese police training to protect VIPs in dangerous situations.